His name was Peter de Vries, the Netherlands' most famous journalist. His execution on a street in Amsterdam was not just a tragedy, it was a message. A message from the drug cartels that now rule, who have turned the Netherlands into their European stronghold, using its liberal laws and perfect logistics to flood the continent with cocaine. This is the story of how they did it, and the price all of Europe is paying. Welcome to Amazing Europe. There was a promise in the Netherlands, the promise of a safe society governed by the law, where ideas are fought with words, not with bullets. But today that promise is faltering, deeply cracked by 3 blows to the heart of the state. First, the murder of the innocent brother of a protected witness. Second, the assassination of his lawyer, Dirk Wiersum. Finally, the public execution of Peter de Vries, the journalist who embodied the country's conscience. These are not mere crimes. They are earthquakes that shake to their foundations a society that believed itself secure. The murders have dominated the debate in the Netherlands, and yet, beyond the media and political uproar, the majority of the population still seems not to have grasped the deep link between the port of Rotterdam and the drug trade that fuels the whole of Europe, nor to have fully taken in the pervasive, deeply rooted presence of organised crime in the country. But what Dutch society is slowest to recognise is a disturbing paradox. The nation's noblest virtues, namely efficiency, openness, and, above all, its famed tolerance, have been turned into weapons against it. To understand how a virtue can give birth to a nightmare, our investigation must begin here, at the beating heart of European trade and at the foundations of a social policy unique in the world. That beating heart of European trade has 2 names, Rotterdam and Antwerp. They are not 2 ports in competition. They are a single, gigantic logistical superorganism, the largest and most advanced on the planet. Rotterdam alone handled over 13 million containers just last year. Together with Antwerp, in Belgium, they form the gateway to an entire continent. It is estimated that more than 70% of the cocaine entering Europe passes through these 2 ports. And it is precisely this unmatched efficiency that made them the perfect target. The South American cartels saw in this hub not an opportunity, but a guarantee, and the numbers prove it. In 2023, authorities celebrated record seizures: 116 tons of cocaine at the port of Antwerp and another 60 tons in Rotterdam. Over 175 tons discovered in a single year, with a value in excess of 10 billion euros. But that is only the tip of a colossal iceberg. All intelligence agencies, from Europol to the DEA, agree. Seizures represent, at best, only 10% of the drugs that make it through. Let's do a chilling calculation. If 175 tons are 10%, that means nearly 2,000 tons of cocaine may have passed through these ports unnoticed. How is this possible? It is not negligence, it is mathematics. Inspecting the 25 million containers that transit here each year is physically impossible. Less than 2% are inspected. For traffickers, it is a rigged gamble in which they have a 98% chance of winning. They use fruit shipments from South America as Trojan horses and teams of corrupt young workers to extract the drugs before the containers leave the terminal. It is a system propped up by a silent cancer, corruption, an unexpected scourge in these 2 countries. But logistics alone are not enough to create a narco-state. You need fertile ground, and this is where we must examine the famous Dutch policy of tolerance. Created with the progressive aim of separating the market for soft drugs from that of hard drugs, it produced a legal paradox that Dutch experts call the backdoor problem. The logic is as simple as it is absurd. Coffee shops are allowed to sell cannabis to consumers through the front door, but Dutch law never created a legal system for production and wholesale supply. This nation's law has created a legal paradox, a true schizophrenia. The tolerance policy applies exclusively to the sale of small quantities to the customer, the so-called front door. But the actual law, the Opium Act, still considers the production, transport and possession of large quantities of cannabis, those needed to stock a shop, a serious crime. What does this mean in practice? That for a coffee shop owner, The act of buying the merchandise he will later sell remains a criminal activity. It's as if a supermarket were allowed to sell milk, but it were a serious crime to buy it from the producer and keep several cartons in the stockroom. Indeed, the inevitable question is, where does all the product on the shelves come from then? The answer is only one, and it's the direct consequence of this law. The owner is forced to turn to the black market. And if you think this sounds too absurd to be true, the final proof has come from the Dutch government itself. It recently launched a pilot program called the Wheat Experiment, the Cannabis Experiment, to create, for the first time, a legal production and supply chain in a number of cities. The very existence of this experiment is the state's implicit admission that for 50 years, the entire system has relied on an illegal supply. Unintentionally, the state acted as the incubator of a criminal industry worth billions, with a guaranteed market, its own coffee shops. It became a true business school for organised crime, which for decades developed illegal know-how, namely logistical skills for importing and distributing, financial networks for laundering profits, and, above all, a consolidated capacity for violence. At that point, the move into cocaine was simply a business decision. Why limit yourself to cannabis when you can use the same routes and the same systems to traffic cocaine with profits 1,000 times greater? This is no longer a theory. It is a reality acknowledged at the highest levels. Amsterdam's mayor, Femke Halsema, has called the current system hypocritical, and the head of the main police union has said that the country shows all the characteristics of a narco-state. They created a criminal infrastructure to manage a problem, without realizing that the very same infrastructure would later be used to create an infinitely bigger one. And now that problem has a name. That problem now has a name, the Mocro Maffia, a label coined by the Dutch media to describe this new era of terror. But if you imagine the mafia as a single pyramid, like the Sicilian Cosa Nostra, you are looking at the wrong enemy. This is not an organization. It is an ecosystem, a decentralized network of clans and criminal cells made up mainly of Dutch citizens of North African origin. They are flexible, resilient, and incredibly difficult to dismantle. Figures like Ridwan Taghi do not operate as bosses of bosses, but as power brokers whose value is measured in contacts, tons of cocaine, and, above all, a terrifying reputation. Their business model is the key. They are not only traffickers, they have become the South American cartel's indispensable partners in Europe. They offer a full package of criminal services. They guarantee the extraction of cocaine from Rotterdam's containers thanks to a widespread network of corrupt port workers. They recruit desperate youths, the Withalers, paid a few €1,000s to retrieve bags of cocaine, becoming the system's disposable workforce. And finally, they offer their most frightening service, violence on demand. Unlike traditional mafias, there are no codes of honor here. Family members, women, lawyers, journalists. There are no longer any untouchable targets. Violence is not the last resort. It is the first means of communication. In 2016, the severed head of a victim was left in full view in Amsterdam, a chilling message in Mexican cartel style, imported into the heart of Europe. Then, in 2020, came a discovery that froze the blood of even the most seasoned investigators. Shipping containers converted into torture chambers, complete with dentists' chairs and tools for mutilation. This is their signature, calculated terror designed to paralyze. For years, this world remained invisible, protected by a digital fortress. We are not talking about ordinary messaging apps, but about exclusive services such as EncroChat and Sky ECC. These were modified smartphones sold for thousands of euros that functioned like a secret, impenetrable version of WhatsApp for criminals. Each message self-destructed after a short time, and a panic code, if entered, could wipe every shred of evidence from the device instantly. Protected by this technology, they operated with the confidence of ghosts. They discussed shipments, sent photos of mountains of cash and, above all, ordered murders with the coldness of a work email, setting fees and providing victims' addresses. Then, between 2020 and 2021, European police forces achieved the impossible. They hacked those networks. For months, they read millions of messages in real time, as if they were sitting at the table with the bosses. They saw the abyss. The evidence collected was so overwhelming that it led to thousands of arrests, providing the basis for monumental trials such as Marengo. For the first time, the veil had been torn. But dismantling the command structures does not stop the contagion. The allure of easy money and of status symbols, like luxury watches and powerful cars, continues to draw followers from neighborhoods where young people feel excluded from society. The network regenerates itself because the business model the Netherlands inadvertently allowed is simply too profitable to die, and its profits are now poisoning the entire economy. The profits from drug trafficking do not remain hidden in briefcases. They are injected directly into the legal economy, poisoning it from within. Dutch authorities have a name for this process: undermining the foundations of society. And the scale of the problem is staggering. Europol estimates that 86% of Europe's most dangerous criminal networks use legitimate business structures. In the Netherlands, we are talking about a parallel criminal economy worth roughly 16 billion euros a year. This dirty money must be laundered, and it hides in plain sight. It is invested in restaurants, bars, car washes, and phone shops. In these businesses, dirty cash is mixed with legitimate takings, inflating reported revenues. Once taxes are paid on these fictitious earnings, the money emerges clean, ready to be used. But the favoured sector is real estate. Narco-capital is used to buy buildings and apartments. Property becomes their vault, a safe way to store wealth that can later be resold to generate a profit that by then will appear perfectly legal. And this has a direct, devastating impact on the lives of honest citizens. A front restaurant whose sole purpose is laundering does not need to be profitable. It can afford to operate at a loss and use unfair tactics, driving into bankruptcy the entrepreneur who pays taxes and follows the rules. And this does not happen only in the Netherlands. Look at the streets of your cities. Ask yourself which kinds of businesses, often cash-based, seem to spring up from nowhere and thrive against any economic logic. Certainly not all of them, but some of these could be part of that same invisible laundering chain. The crisis becomes even more personal with the property bubble. The enormous liquidity of the clans floods the market, sending prices skyrocketing and making our cities unaffordable. Of course, this is not the only reason behind the real estate boom, as we have shown in many other videos, but it is certainly the most underestimated and least known cause among the general public. But the highest cost is the loss of trust. Criminal money corrupts not only port workers, but also white-collar professionals, notaries, accountants, and real estate agents who become facilitators of the system. And while the foundations of society are being undermined, citizens pay the bill. A Dutch report estimated the social costs of drug-related crime alone at more than 4 billion euros a year for Dutch taxpayers. These are not abstract numbers. They are concrete costs for police investigations that last years, for monumental trials that clog the courts, and for keeping thousands of criminals in prison. Added to this are the costs for the private sector. Dutch banks alone spend over €500 million a year on anti-money laundering measures. These are billions taken from healthcare and education to finance a war that so far seems impossible to win. A war that is now striking at the heart of the state. The silent war fought in the ports and on the streets was about to become a frontal attack on the Dutch state. The breaking point has a name: the Marengo trial, the largest legal case ever launched against the narcotics leadership in the country. To bring it down, the state relied on a key witness, Nabil B., a former member of boss Ridwan Taghi's organisation. The criminal network's response was not a courtroom defence, it was a campaign of terror. The attack came in 3 acts, 3 messages written in blood. 1 week after the announcement of Nabil B's cooperation, revenge struck his brother, Ridwan, an innocent entrepreneur with no ties to that world. The message was clear. Cooperation is paid for with the lives of your loved ones. The state cannot protect them. Then the attack escalated. They murdered Dirk Wiersum, the witness's lawyer, a direct assault on the judicial system designed to terrorise the entire legal profession. But the blow that made Europe tremble came on the 6th of July 2021. the public execution of Peter de Vries, the most famous journalist in the Netherlands, who had become advisor and confidant to the witness. It was pure narco-terrorism, a final message to the whole of society. Nobody is untouchable, not even your national heroes. Our power can reach anywhere. From that moment on, the threat reached the top levels of the state. The Prime Minister himself, and even Crown Princess Amalia, the heir apparent and future Queen, were placed under guard after credible threats from the same world of narcotics. The princess had to abandon her student life and seclude herself in the royal palace, a symbolic image of a country no longer able to guarantee the freedom and security promised to its citizens, not even for politicians or members of the royal family. The social contract, that unwritten pact in which freedoms are ceded in exchange for security, has been broken. When defenders of the law and truth must live like prisoners to survive, it means that the criminal power, financed by billions from cocaine, has managed to undermine the very foundations of democracy. And this is no longer just a Dutch problem. It concerns you much more personally than you may think. But before we reveal how, if you found this video informative, we kindly ask you to support our project with a like, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you don't miss our new videos. And remember our new channel, America vs. Europe, where we rank all European countries, the USA and Canada, according to various factors. The broken social contract in the Netherlands is only the first chapter of a crisis without borders. To think this is merely a Dutch problem would be a fatal mistake. The Netherlands are simply the prototype, the beachhead from which organised crime is launching its offensive across the continent. Because when law enforcement steps up the pressure on Rotterdam, drug trafficking does not stop. It moves. It is a strategy experts call port hopping, jumping from one port to another, and it is already happening. Hamburg, in Germany, has seen a record surge in seizures, becoming the new frontier. Le Havre in France, Valencia in Spain, are seeing rising attempts at infiltration. The cartels are diversifying routes, replicating the model that worked so well in the Netherlands. But the central hub, the warehouse from which everything is distributed, remains the same. According to Europol and the European Monitoring Centre for Drugs and Drug Addiction, the vast majority of the cocaine consumed in Europe enters through Rotterdam and Antwerp. It is a market worth more than 11 billion euros. And we take this opportunity to remind you of a crucial point. The main gateway for cocaine into Europe is not Rotterdam, but Antwerp, in Belgium. In 2023, Belgian authorities seized as much as 116 tons there. Belgium too is facing a devastating narco-war. Some may ask, if Antwerp is the primary problem, why focus on the Netherlands? Because while Antwerp provides the main logistical infrastructure, it is the Dutch Mocro Maffia that developed the criminal organisation running it. The Netherlands' tolerant cannabis policy has inadvertently spawned a hugely lucrative professional criminal ecosystem with global reach. It is these Dutch networks that control and profit from trafficking that also passes through Antwerp. There is also a different kind of violence. In Antwerp, the fighting is over control of the port. In the Netherlands, a terrorist campaign has been waged against the state itself, including the murders of lawyers and journalists, because the command centre of the criminal empire is based there. We focused on the Netherlands not because it is the only critical case, but because it provides the clearest mirror of a possible European future. Despite their differences, these two ports function as a single, unstoppable criminal engine. The cocaine that arrives at these two ports feeds London's street gangs, is carried along German motorways to supply Berlin and the lucrative Scandinavian markets. Even Italian mafias, such as the 'Ndrangheta, find it more efficient to import through this hub than to manage everything themselves. For the citizen of Manchester or Marseille, the consequence is concrete. The violence and decay in their streets are funded and supplied by a container unloaded hundreds of kilometres away. And to run this empire, an ecosystem of crime has formed in the Netherlands that resembles a United Nations of crime. It is not only the Mocro Mafia, it is a marketplace where the most powerful organisations on the planet collaborate. The Calabrian 'Ndrangheta is not just a client, but a strategic partner, that uses the Netherlands for logistics and to launder its profits. Albanian criminal networks are considered the professionals, the specialists who provide the teams for the physical recovery of the drugs. And for years, the super Irish cartel of the Kinahans, one of the most powerful in the world, used Amsterdam as a base to direct its global operations. It is a flexible business model based on fluid alliances. A Dutch-Moroccan clan can manage contact with a Colombian cartel, use an Albanian team to extract the merchandise, and then sell it to a German criminal organization. They have become a multinational of crime, with legal headquarters in the logistical heart of Europe. And just like a multinational, they export their profits. The narco billions, once laundered through the Dutch economy, are used to buy luxury flats in London, hotels on Spain's Costa del Sol, or to be safely parked in Dubai's financial centres, which have become the boss's preferred refuge. Every euro laundered contaminates a piece of the European legal economy, distorting markets and making criminal power increasingly indistinguishable from financial power. The Netherlands are not the origin of the disease, but they are the incubator, allowing the contagion to spread across the continent. At the end, the threads of our investigation come together to reveal an uncomfortable truth. We followed the thread of a deadly paradox: how a nation's greatest virtues, its efficiency and tolerance, were turned into weapons against it, creating the perfect ecosystem for crime. We followed the thread of a genetic mutation of criminality, which evolved from a traditional mafia into a global network, ruthless and pragmatic like a multinational. And finally, we followed the most fragile thread of all, the broken one of the social contract, the promise of security a state makes to its citizens, shattered by the bullets of the narcotics trade. The Netherlands are only the first mirror in which Europe is forced to look. As we watch the continent's logistical heart turn into a narco-state, the final question is not whether this war can be won. The real question is, have we already surrendered without even fighting? For a broader perspective on this situation, we strongly recommend watching this video, where you will discover the 10 European countries where organised crime is most present. That's all for this video. See you next time.